Hi everybody. I said I was going to do a read through of the new story, Journey Home. So I'm just going to start with a few pages and see how I go. I might do it chapter by chapter, but some of my chapters are a little long, so here we go. The first chapter of Journey Home is called The Big Sleep. And so, like any other journey out of Liverpool Street Station, Samantha Wainscott, known to her friends as Sammy, sat watching the commuters with papers and personal stereos, transfixed as if all was as usual, just the journey home and then dinner with her partner at the cottage in the countryside. She lived in the greenbelt outskirts of London, preferring village life over thousands of people who habituated the big city, the big smoke. The battery of her iPod has gone flat during the morning journey, and there had been no connecting cord to charge it. Her habit was to nod off on such an occasion. Like anybody else, she took a visual scan of her fellow commuters, a quick look to see who she bore the company of before the inevitable semi-sleep-like state, the comatose of boredom, took a hold. She closed her eyes momentarily, but the person opposite started to move around and to susurrate the pages of his paper while opening it. A suited gentleman sat behind the off-white pages of a broadsheet. He appeared to be the type of person who's reluctant to break old habits, someone who didn't embrace the new age of advanced gadgets. With some degree of envy, Sammy started to watch people, commuters with iPads, happily reading the latest online version of news and events. New travellers got on and took the available seats around, and everyone did the adjust moment, where they try and withdraw internally and externally to provide space, and then elbow to elbow the train started up and took off, away from the central station, away from the quagmire of hopeless, endless, mechanical work. And as if to settle the fact, the chugging rhythm of the wheels and the swaying of the carriage made her doze again, eyelids fluttering and opening, and then, finally, the space was blank. In Sammy's mind was a screen of semi-grey light, ashen landscapes, flickered like a war zone. The space ahead was overcast like death, unearthly, lifeless, and without hope. She had been watching programs about the space satellites that picture other planets only a few evenings earlier, that showed no sign of life at all, but were riddled with craters and impact damage from space, meteorites and asteroids. Was Earth going to be like this dream? She had had them before, like some sort of transfer to another place in time, as if boredom had rendered her thus in this place of hopeless despair. What or who was trying to talk to her? With the most absurd instruction, something about preparation for war. The voice seemed a male one. It appeared to be human and English-speaking, but distant, It was like some form of hypnosis. She felt under some kind of trance whilst asleep. What did he mean, practice for wartime? So that some of the journey ahead was going to be punctuated with periods of devastation for her country, and some periods would carry on as if there was recovery. Literally, the bisections of the journey, which were represented by the train's carriage along a track, showed hour-long sections of death and destruction whilst being able to emerge into sunlight and tranquility, the normal in whatever life had been up to then. And then, whew, she was awake, she was alive, she hadn't been devoured by a monster. She was on the train that had left from Liverpool Street, and no bomb had gone off. No one had moved from their established positions, no one in her immediate environment, but the suited man had folded his paper and was staring a bit. He had grey eyes and was of mature years. Had she been talking in her sleep? She tried smiling back at him and giving an embarrassed cough. Good weather today, she murmured to him as if he were about to squash her. She felt she might make light of her somnolence. He just gestured a response with a smile, not really speaking out loud. He seemed troubled, a troubled man. Would you mind if I had a look at your paper? Sammy was making a remarkable effort to be unusually sociable. But her dream had quite disturbed her psyche, and distraction was really the prime motive for the question and the ask. Surely in true English politeness he might loan the newspaper to her. Nothing really of interest in there, he spoke whilst folding and passing the used paper to her, fully extending his sleeved arm and recoiling, masking a shyness that had otherwise not been observed. She was all of 24 years, in a new job, and as sprightly as youth often is. He probably could not believe her needing the paper. The broadsheet was opened, and momentarily she could shield herself from any more glaring looks. Why was she so sleepy lately? The paper was a bit dry, in terms of real news. Only the usual political, predictable banter between one party and another, and nothing about natural disaster anywhere. She had often dreamed of places that seemed to be in another time zone, but was always glad to wake up, deeming the times or predicament of people in those places of greyness to be purely off. Once she had dreamed of a much larger underground system of travel, as if the whole of the London Underground system had doubled in size and gotten a whole load more complex, almost worthy of a street map. So, if the disaster of disasters was to occur, it seemed obvious that mankind would move underground. Well, possibly. Every time she had one of these dreams, the colour of the sky above was grey, and just lately she had begun to value sunshine and blue sky days more than usual, as if something might occur to steal them away more permanently. Whatever could be causing all this? The man looked as if he was getting ready to leave the train at the next stop, and Sammy obligingly folded the paper and handed it back to him with a brave "Thank you." "Not at all," he said. The man was still half smiling, and he moved his feet as if to lift himself from the seat But the train jolted to a halt, and he fell back momentarily. Sammy saw he was quite aged, and that people who grew older often looked frailer. His face was hollow and pale, but his lips seemed more reddened. Old people often had inherent problems of health. No doubt the man must have something of a weak heart, she thought. The next stop on, more people alighted, and someone took the vacant seat. The new neighbour was still talking to her mobile phone. She looked the image of an aunt who lived in the countryside. There was still about half an hour to waste in amusing herself, and the remainder of the journey was spent avoiding dozing as far as possible. Only she couldn't help it. After a day's work, the sense of peace gliding out of a humdrum day was inevitably, subconsciously, causing her to lean her head against the back headrest. Between watching idly the rushing trees and fields that raced past as the train picked up speed, her eyelids grew heavier once more. English cricket was one of those wonderful games that unites a country and spells summer and sunshine. Floating away above the cricketers, Sammy was soothed by the gliding feeling of flight, as if she had wings attached and was weightless and looking for a new place to live. Half of the fun of studying for a degree was the right to explore a world further from your childhood home, and to grow independent, to see somewhere new and explore that greater world of knowledge gleaned from the books of philosophers and giants of the art world and history. What was it like to be like that, the ones with such understanding? In her sleep, in her half-sleep, she saw a house with bow windows, and it seemed someone was showing her a flat on the first floor with walls the colour of cerise. In the kitchenette area, an old-fashioned set of formica table and chairs, in lemon yellow, stood in a space by the arch of the door that led to the living area. The room was spacious and bright, with windows on two walls which seemed flooded with sunshine. She accepted the room for rent and was taken back outside into the street, where the heat from the sun on the cars caused the air above to flow and ripple like water. The local station in her dream was something of an oddity, as no trains used this track, and the grass was long and growing through the planks of wood. The happiest sense of peaceful. Sammy took it into her head, then, that the only way back was by foot, and she jumped down onto the disused track and started to walk. The train shunted to a halt, and briefly Sammy awoke, enough to open half of one eye. The carriage was beginning to empty out a bit more. One or two stops and she would be in the countryside and nearer to her hometown. The places in the dream seemed to present a landscape of hills, steep in height and part of the Sussex dome-like downs. Roads cut through the land efficiently, conveying traffic, busy with cars, and like a scar to the nature around them. The hills were absent of either sheep or cattle, and were stark with only grassy vegetation. Often there was the feeling of something hostile, something deadly. Now, when she awoke, it was like that. The impression had stayed put. There were the towns in the past that seemed wonderful because of historic cultural legacies left to those who dwelt in them from past histories. Sammy fumbled a bit in her bag as she woke and penned a few details of the journey in her diary. The pen itself had diamante glass studs pressed or glued into its exterior in a pattern with beads, and she had bought it at a store in a craft market in London. The ink flowed out in a regular blue in looped hand-styled lettering. The book was covered in gold and blue patterned material, the design of William Morris, a painter and creative of the late 19th and early 20th century. In an age of retrospective thought, a back-to-nature movement had been formed, the pictures encapsulating a sense of morality and remorse for loss of innocence and value in the day-to-day running of the then society. The paisley leafage and curling gold threads worked into the silks of the material. As she closed the book to put it in her shoulder bag, she had remembered the time when her mother was visiting and her birthday had been spent browsing for gifts. The sun was already setting across the land by the time she arrived home. The streaks of flame reds and clouds the colour of lilac, twinned with golden rays. The wrought iron gate opened without much effort, but the sound of it echoed in the air and told her partner she was back. She ran into the house and hurried up the staircase to her bedroom. The house was warm from the fire being lit and the smell of roasting vegetables and wood burning. It felt homely and comforting. The meal and company and conversation were always the same, always how her day was and what was the journey home like. The routine kept Sammy's world simple. All about the house were pictures and drawings, the artwork of her years at college. The mantel bore the images of family, Robbie's father and mother and sisters, and Sammy's mother, though past, was there too. The little dog they kept was something of a spaniel in breed, with floppy soft ears and jet black in colour. As they sat down, with the dog curled up with them as they lay, Sammy recounted the dream she had had on the train. It happened again, the same grey bleak weather, and people, but not with the same life in them. They seemed unaware of my presence, and the motion like something you see when people have had the great burdens laid on them. After the dinner and conversation they headed for bed. Another day complete, the two satisfied and tired but happy. Sammy's night was very blissful, but she would awake almost as if frightened by something. Robbie had got used to Sammy talking about the other worlds she encountered. Sammy's mother was the one who told her daughter about night flights, and it seemed that it was entirely possible that she had inherited something of a gift. What if what I am seeing happens in the future? Sammy was whispering this to the air in the darkness after the lamp had been switched off. Robbie was already asleep, and she dozed too, and again was flying through the air and seeing something that was familiar but old, something of a mansion her mother had looked at as a potential place to create homes for students. The place had priest holes and secret staircases, and something of a spacious dance floor of yesteryear bourgeois balls for the upper classes. The house had laid empty and disused, no owner alive. The wood floors not even dusted. The price was too high even so, and the property not sold. She had all the manner of dream-like scenarios given to her over the years. Did it all have meaning? An asteroid rock, had hit the planet a week or so before, and had caused damage in a sudden fashion. It had come from outer space and hit the surface of the Earth. Was it possible, then, that the planets and solar system would collapse? Sammy's mind went over the dream images again and again. Would the sun, which lately had looked more liquid or more liquid orange, would it last for eternity? Germany had created something of a sun simulator, said reports in the paper. The LED sun was pictured with its series of lights which would radiate light and heat. And in place of a failing sun, this would be used to sustain life. It had to be run from space, but it was much nearer to Earth's surface than the natural sun. California had been regularly ravaged by fires bursting out in the forests in recent events. Some people were saying that the polar caps of ice were melting and the sea levels were indeed rising. Who were the people responsible for the grey cloud cover, the perpetual winter conditions? Sammy's mother, too, had dreamt of the land being flooded. She had also told of this dream many years before, but this too seemed to be happening with record rainfall in some areas of England, falling in just hours, not days or months. There was still a question in Sammy's head that someone was responsible for it all.